Good evening, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the next installment in our SMSNA webinar series. My name is Reifti Bole. I'm currently a fellow in andrology at the Cleveland Clinic, and I'll be serving as your moderator this evening. Our topic today is hiring the next generation of urology talent, and we have a fantastic discussion lined up for you today. This is our agenda for tonight. Our goal is to walk away with an understanding of how the new physician workforce thinks and how their outlook has shaped the dynamics of hiring in the current market. Our panel of sexual medicine specialists comes to you from all across the country. Dr. Andino is a current andrology fellow at UCLA. Dr. Biarelli and Dr. Gross are from the University of Utah, and Dr. Yang is from the Mayo Clinic. From the institutional perspective, we have Michelle Seifert and Michael Palanchik from the Office of Physician Recruitment at the Cleveland Clinic. So who are the newest generation of physicians in sexual medicine? I'm talking about Generation Y, or the millennials. They were born approximately from 1981 to 1996, and in our field, after residency and fellowship, they're the newest additions to the practicing workforce. And I'll start with a disclaimer: by no means is any one person defined completely by their generation. But in general, these are some of the traits that have been described in the literature and anecdotally when describing this newest generation of working physicians. They're known to favor a very egalitarian, team-based approach rather than a strict hierarchy. They're technology natives, adept at communication, and they prize accessibility of information. They're high performers and achievers, and part of this means embracing frequent feedback. They see feedback as an important part of patient safety and also employer engagement. They value investment and involvement in their practices. They want to be involved in decision-making. Leadership opportunities are often a great way for surgeons to get invested in their practice and see what their career could look like if they were to stay long-term. They're civic-minded and interested in the greater good. They also value work-life balance. And as a workforce, they tend to be from much more diverse backgrounds than in the past. Every generation of physicians has had its own separate challenges and many shared problems that we can all still relate to. But what are some stressors that are a little unique to this generation? Well, they carry more student loan debt than any prior generation at an average of almost $200,000. This has important implications for savings and retirement benefits. All physicians now spend more time looking at a screen or doing administrative work than ever before. One study estimated potentially up to 5 hours a day on the electronic medical record. But this is all that the current generation knows. They're building their careers and reputations in an era of constant and easily accessible scrutiny online. About 80% of patients will look at online ratings prior to seeing their physician nowadays. And like many non-physicians in this generation, many of life's milestones are actually delayed compared to prior. For example, delays perhaps in getting married, home ownership, and having children can sometimes be a source of distress. Now, why should we care? Because of the intergenerational workplace. The physician workforce consists of multiple generations with sometimes very different approaches to work and life. And these differences can lead to challenges with integrating new physicians into the team. But it's extremely important to invest in the newest generation of surgeons in our field. This will set them up for success, improve patient care, and help to ease future workforce transitions. And what does this investment really look like? Later on, from an employer's perspective, we'll discuss how a one-size-fits-all recruitment program may no longer meet the needs of a very diverse physician population. Physicians have unique needs along their career journey, and the goal is now to offer flexibility, choice, increased value, and address their life stage. Michelle and Michael will talk shortly about how one institution has chosen to offer a variety of strategies to help recruit and retain talented surgeons in the field. And with that, we'll move to our physician panel insights. I want to share some perspectives from successful sexual medicine specialists in this new generation. What were their priorities and how did they choose the right fit for their job? We'll start with you, Dr. Andino. Can you tell us something in particular that you prioritize in your job or in your job search, and how an organization could help you meet those goals?
Thanks, Dr. Bole. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay, and I'm honored and thankful to be a part of the panel, especially as someone who's still actively looking at positions in Southern California. One of the things that's unique to my situation and something that's weighed very heavily is the fact that my wife is an OBGYN, she's a surgeon, and so part of it has been geography. So I'm not only looking at my career and academic aspirations, but also what makes sense for us as a family unit, thinking about those delayed milestones, future family planning, things like that. And at the same time, in the opportunities I'm looking at, both academic and outside of the academic space, is what is the flexibility, or what are the options in terms of not just pay, but rather parental time off, vacation time? Is that something that's set in stone from the beginning, or is there some flexibility moving on as I move forward in my career? For example, talking to some folks at a managed care organization, they have kind of built-in systems. So if there's a particular year where you need less vacation time, you can fill in space with time in the clinic or in the operating room, and you're getting compensated for that time. However, if there's a year of milestones, of family events, of reunions, you will take a pay cut for that time, but it's kind of a built-in flexibility where you can just have more of that time available for travel, meeting up with family and folks like that. So that is one thing that kind of resonated a lot with that millennial generation overview that Dr. Bole said, that maybe it's not so much about only the financials and the individual, but what's making sense for their family unit.
Absolutely. That's so important. Thank you for sharing that perspective. I'd like to pivot now and talk about one of the differences that we mentioned about this generation is this extreme comfort with technology, having grown up with it. Now, you've worked and published extensively in telehealth, and you've even advocated for it at the national level to improve patient access to care. So, as a future academic sexual medicine specialist, do you have any thoughts on how your future employer could harness technology to help you take care of patients more effectively or more efficiently, and whether that would make an impact on your thoughts about a certain job?
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a really good thought. And it's something that, if used appropriately, can also allow for some flexibility. So, for instance, I know one of my faculty at my residency training institution has a telehealth clinic on Fridays, and that actually allows him to often travel outside of the main city of Ann Arbor and be able to do a telehealth visit from wherever he chooses. So he essentially can have start traveling for almost like a long weekend because he has this built-in telehealth clinic time. So it is really something that could potentially provide some flexibility. And while many institutions are trying to best understand logistically and operationally what makes the most sense, there are a number of places that are going towards either half day or full days of telehealth, where someone could potentially be at home if they have a sick toddler, but still be able to interact with patients and make sure to take care of some follow-up visits or things that could provide some flexibility and can be done from a computer, just like we're doing in this webinar. So I haven't seen how some folks have explored that thus far and looking for a specific career, but definitely trying to understand if an institution already has some guidelines in place, or if folks who are already at the institution, maybe some of our peers have built-in telehealth days, or if they're having telehealth visits between patients, and talking to them, to the leadership. And is that something that can be moved around? If there's a day where you have to travel somewhere, could you still catch up on pathology reports, labs, and still have some of these important conversations with patients, but that you can have from anywhere? I think it is something that's going to become more and more a part of the conversation.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, certainly having had clinic days where you're going between virtual visits and in-person visits, it actually might be very smooth to have a full day or a half day of telehealth where everything's virtual and offer flexibility for both the patient and the provider. So that's excellent. Have you heard anything about marketing for doctors building practices and how employers might be able to kind of harness technology to help with that?
Oh yeah, certainly. And this will very much depend on the type of system that you're joining. in academic centers, it's much more likely that you already have established referral patterns. They know that it's a center of excellence. And so primary care doctors, family medicine, et cetera, may already know to refer to the institution in general, and that then the institution is going to help delegate the patient to the right care line. But certainly that I know that many private practice and larger groups will dedicate some time and funds to marketing. And there are some folks that, especially in the sexual health and male fertility world, understand the value of doing their own, essentially their own online marketing and creating this online presence, whether it's through Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, or YouTube. It's going to vary, and that's going to depend a lot on the individual and what they feel comfortable with. But as you said, a lot of patients are turning to the internet to hear a little bit about their doctor's ratings. What are they experts in? And a little bit of what if you can control some of that content and make it easy for folks to find some of the information that the types of conditions that you take care of, some of the types of surgeries that you take care of, I'm sure that it's going to help pull patients and bring patients in. I mean, at least once or twice a week, I see folks here with Dr. Mills who found one of his YouTube videos, or through the UCLA website, found a page where he kind of provided an overview of an article without the medical jargon. And they said, hey, I read that and it applied to my situation. And so I came seeking you out. So I think this is something that you should certainly explore, how much of the institution is going to do this for you. And early on, as you're establishing your career, I think I've heard from many up and coming sex med and male fertility docs, that is something that they also take on themselves. And they say, you know, maybe the institution or the practice I'm joining does a part of it, but I'm also reaching out to primary care doctors, family practitioners directly and saying, hey, I'm new in your area. These are the types of conditions that I manage. If you have patients that deal with any of this, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll help get them into clinic.
Absolutely. So a combination of the employer maybe stepping in and self-directed from the surgeon. And last question, this is something that I was thinking, even just as a fellow, onboarding. Do you think there's a potential for technology to help in this generation with some of these onboarding modules that we do, some of the CME?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yes, if we could figure that out together,
could employers help with that?
Everyone's lives would be much better. I mean, the onboarding process, I think we've texted about it as we were starting fellowship in July. Can be so onerous and painful. And if an institution has multiple sites, sometimes you feel like you're putting in the same information just a million different ways. How much of that is going to rely on technology versus standardizing forms and having a place where, look, this is all the key points of information that we need from you. And then we're going to have our team of admin folks who already work for the institution be able to pull out of that and fill in the forms and just get your signature. I think there's certainly room there to make things better. I think everyone's driven crazy by the amount of paperwork, no matter what stage you're in, that you have to fill out.
That's exactly what I think. If there's anyone, practice managers listening, not that this would be something I don't think that anyone would say makes or breaks their decision to take a job. This is certainly something that would probably help someone once they decided, is making that process a little easier. Thanks so much, Dr. Andino.
Of course. Thank you.
Next up, Dr. Biarelli, can you tell us something that you prioritize in finding your job and how your department helped you meet those goals?
Yeah. So kind of similar to Dr. Andino, you know, my husband's a physician as well. And our priority when we were looking for positions was really location. So, you know, he is doing his fellowship here and he matched here. So, I knew that I had to look for a job here. And I think when you are prioritizing geography, you kind of have to be flexible about the type of practice that you're looking for. So, you know, obviously you may want to be in a, you know, large institution, a well-established academic practice. But I think you kind of expand your search a little bit, just to kind of make sure that you're covering all your bases. So, when I, you know, first reached out, I knew that when I was starting, I was probably going to be seeing a fair amount of general urology before I could really kind of gain traction and gain more of a men's health practice.
Yeah.
And I think that could happen, in any type of practice that you're in. So I think it's important to, and one thing that I was pretty transparent about was, what parts of general practice do you feel comfortable seeing that you're willing to see, right?
Yes.
And so I was pretty transparent that, my skills and my knowledge, they don't really expand into the realm of, for instance, female voiding dysfunction.
Sure.
And I think as a urologist who is female, sometimes you kind of automatically can fall into this pattern where you're seeing a lot of female patients, even if you're andrology trained or oncology trained or endourology, whatever it is. And so I was able to work with our team on, the scheduling templates and to just ensure that I wasn't seeing certain things like that. And so I think if you're in the process of a job search and there are certain things that you feel strongly about, you should be transparent about it. I think when you're coming out of training, you kind of automatically fall into this feeling of like, I just want a job. I'll do whatever you tell me to do. But I think that you're actually in more of a position of, to be able to negotiate than you think you are. And if there are certain things that you think in your practice that would be a challenge for you or, might limit your abilities, then I think you should be upfront about it. So that was probably one of the biggest things, just coming up front about that. And then, certainly, as you just discussed, there are obviously things about compensation and time off and, being able to have kind of that flexible time, especially if you are starting a family or considering that. And I think something else that I had thought about when, considering a position is I think it's important to know about your potential operating room time and whether you're going to have dedicated block time, because when you start a new job, you really kind of want to jump in and be productive. But it can be really difficult if you don't have some degree of dedicated time. And I think you just kind of don't want your operative time to be left hanging in the air like that a little bit.
Absolutely. Is that something that you kind of brought up initially? Was that something that was easily available information to find out, or was that something that you started talking about a little later on in the process with your department?
Yeah, that was something that was a little bit later on. I think it's a lot to bring up at like your first conversation with a group. But I think once you've, kind of established that you're interested in a group and, or an institution, and this is somewhere where you would highly consider, then I think those are definitely some questions that, you shouldn't be shy about asking. Because, there are some places where there may be department block time, but that's not necessarily your block time.
That's
so
a
it's
great
not,
point.
Not always the same thing.
Right. And that goes back to what you were mentioning about trying to build up that practice at the beginning and sort of being willing to be flexible. But, we're sort of saying, to what extent? I mean, OR time, of course, is important. And it's important to know, especially starting out, so that you keep and maintain some, all your surgical skills that you want to keep practicing.
Right.
That that information going in. That's a great point. Pivoting to another topic that I'd love to ask you about. We mentioned a little bit that this generation is committed to social change. And I know you have a master's in public health, focus on international health. So just wanted to direct this question to you. Now, just, in the process of meeting people through your work, working with different people in the field, have you seen many of your colleagues with similar interests incorporate advocacy work or mission trips and things like that into their careers, whether that means protected time or support?
Yeah. So I don't have personal experience with negotiating something like this, at
Sure.
least not yet, but I have had colleagues who have, definitely done advocacy work and gone on mission trips. And it's definitely involved. So if it's something that you're interested in, it's definitely worth mentioning during, some of your initial conversations with your employer. I think one question is, have other people in the practice been able to do this? Have they been able to go on mission trips? Or as far as funding, can you use, for instance, CME funds towards these trips? Or, potentially other questions, would it be difficult to take time off? And,
Right.
in a RVU based practice, it may not be, in the best incentive of the practice to let you go on these medical missions. But I think these are all things that you kind of have to bring up, because you obviously need to have some time off that you're not gaining revenue for the practice, but is good for experience and potentially for advertising the practice as well. If you're thinking of how can I pitch this to the people to let me do this.
Right.
Also, that time off, is it your vacation time, or is it, additional time that your practice is willing to let you take? And if you're in academics and maybe have a focus on trainee education, and you're interested in maybe bringing a fellow or resident with you, are there funds for the fellow or the resident to come with you, or is that going to come out of your pocket? So, again, I haven't personally incorporated any of this into when I was joining, but I think these are all questions that people would want to ask if it's something that they're interested in.
Those are fantastic points. And I have had a lot of people, sort of bring that up. I have some colleagues as well who are interested in advocacy work and mission trips. And those are all really good practical questions that I think are important for both sides to kind of consider. Because as you said, going on mission trips or doing advocacy work, it's really good for the practice and also for the individual if that's something that they're passionate about. And so it's definitely a win-win, and knowing how to phrase it in that way as well is just so important. So thank you so much for those insights. Dr. Gross, we'd love to hear from you next. What did you prioritize when finding your job, and how did your department show that they were invested in your goals?
Thank you for having me. I'm kind of like Dr. Borelli in some ways, that I think when I first started looking jobs, I was like, whoever will take me in some ways. But then as I was interviewing more and like talking to my friends who were interviewing and really trying to learn more, I kind of found that people are trying to hire you. It's not like a shortage or anything like that. In some andrology positions, yes, if you want to do certain things, you're going to have to create ties and things like that. So if you want to do IVF, there's no IVF program where you're at, you're going to have to be willing to work for that.
Right.
So for me, one of the biggest things to find was just a culture and a community where we're all working together for the care of the patient. I know I've been in places in the past where you go in and, everyone who's scrubbing is like scowling at you and, that type of place. And it can be hard to tell from an interview if that's what it is like there. So if you can spend time in the OR, that's usually a dead giveaway. People can only hold it together for like 15 minutes in the OR. Their real self is revealed. So if you can, watch that, that's great. For me, it was really important to have a practice mix that I wanted. So, I did want to have the majority of my practice be, sexual medicine, andrology, infertility, all of that. And I think it's important to get things in writing or really talk to the people who are doing things that are similar to what you're doing to be able to make sure that that's actually what you're going to be able to do when you get there. So, I cheated a little bit. I ended up where I did my fellowship, but having talked to a lot of my friends. So for example, in academic places, you might have somebody who's, super high volume implanter, and they're not willing to give any of that practice up. Or they may be like, hey, I've been doing this for forever. I'm fine to share this. You just really have to see what it is. And it grows with time. So, your practice isn't going to be exactly what you want right away. Right. I think like Dr. Borelli was saying, if you're expected to do some general, if you want to do some general, kind of defining what that is early can be really helpful. I think those are really big things. Teaching, is that something that you want to do? What admin, what kind of time will you have to do the things that you need to do? Oh, that's worth figuring out up front.
Those are great points. So practice makes figuring out what general really means to you, and based on your strengths. And then are you going to get time to do some of the other things that are important to you, like teaching, for example? Those are great. One question that I had for you in particular, this generation is known for innovation and drive and a very strong commitment to accessibility to patient care. And in addition to sexual medicine, I believe you're one of the only surgeons to offer a HoLEP in your state. Is that right?
That is correct.
That's awesome. What I'm thinking is just, it can be very challenging initially to bring a new procedure to a practice and then know how to go about practically doing it and having the support to do it. So how did you approach getting the resources you needed to offer this procedure that nobody else does, where you are, and build up that practice? And what advice might you offer to someone looking to bring a new procedure to a practice who's just, starting out?
It is tough. It's still tough in some ways, just because it's a huge expense up front. And I think my institution has been able to support me with it, but at the same time, they don't have any experience with it. I'm the one who knows like all the equipment the best, and like everything about it. So
exactly,
it'll be like, hey, this button isn't working. What do I do? And it's really hard getting other people invested in those kinds of things. I'd say if you're in private practice or looking at private practice jobs, make sure you get these kinds of things in your contract. So if you want to do something in particular, get it in your contract. Usually if they're on board with you doing that thing, they're going to be willing to do that if they're really invested in you actually doing it. I think academic jobs are a little bit different. I don't think there's much variation in that. You can always ask if it's something that's really important to you. But like I've had friends who, for example, wanted to do robotics, and then they weren't able to do robotics, and then their robotics credentials expired, and then they're trying to do it now. And like it needs to be like a time-based thing for equipment. And yeah, it's surprising how much, like when you're starting a procedure that you really haven't done in a little while, and you're doing it for the first time on your own, and especially if it's a fairly challenging procedure, there's a lot more that goes on behind it than just the remembering how to do the procedure. It's definitely still doable, but plan ahead. That first day, don't do 2 of them. I made that mistake. Don't recommend it.
Okay.
Try to get everything, do a dry run the day before if you can. Make sure you have all the equipment. Yeah.
That's a great point. Now, when you talk about specifying some of these things before you start, how specific is specific? Talking about new workflows, clinic space, ancillary support, or just equipment. What things do you think you'd need to specify beforehand bringing this procedure?
It could be a ton. So billing, for example, is something you might not think of. Like the first part, I would think, the code for HoLEP is holmium laser enucleation of the prostate. It's like not that confusing, right? But they were billing it as the total wrong thing. So like I had to write out like what the code is. And I've talked to friends too who are starting to do Trimix injections, or you name it, that wasn't done before, and nobody knows how to bill for it. Nobody knows how to get the actual supplies. So meds, pre-op, post-op, equipment, nursing, got to kind of be a step ahead and expect nobody to have any idea what's going on.
Wow.
They have the best intentions. It depends, like, if you have a good rep for whatever it is you do, that can be very helpful. For our Morse later, our reps aren't necessarily very hands-on. So that is one thing that's challenging. But if there is something that you can get a rep for, get them there, have them do in-services. If often they won't ask, they won't offer, but if you ask with some frequency, they'll eventually give it.
That's great. So be persistent, be the expert in the room, more so than you are already.
Yeah, I think you have to be, you have to set your boundaries too. You can't do everything. So, debrief at the end, talk to whoever admin is and say, hey, these are the things that we need to improve. Yeah, those are the big ones. That's
fantastic. And then perhaps from the employer side, it's sounding like to support a new surgeon, bringing a new procedure that's going to bring a lot of value and bring in patients who need that procedure, having that transparent conversation about how best to support them, maybe having, an excellent practice manager, working with them and being really clear about what kind of, staff or equipment they need will really set them up for success. Thank you so much, Dr. Gross. Dr. Yang, rounding out our physician panel now, what was your main priority when job searching? And can you talk a little bit about how you expressed those priorities and how your current department supported you in that?
Yeah, thanks everyone again for having me as well. I will try to say some new things because some people already stole my answers.
You can echo, and I think that's important.
Dr. Andino, I think, and we probably run into this more and more often, but my wife's also a physician and she's a Mohs surgeon. And as I think everyone will realize, as you become more specialized, you tend to, some job opportunities become a little bit more difficult to find or coordinate. But in training, we had a urologist, Dr. Hoosman, who would always say there are three things that you're looking for in a job, and it's rare you could get all three. But one is your geography, the other is your job satisfaction, and the last one being kind of more financial satisfaction. And you'd be pretty lucky to get two of those three, and you'll be very lucky if you can get all three. And so for us, I honestly thought I was going to end up in private practice, but when it came down to finding a career opportunity that worked well for myself and my wife, we actually were down in Atlanta first, but had ended up moving back to Mayo for this opportunity. So I have a fair amount of experience looking for jobs, I would say.
That's fantastic.
In terms of what kind of group I was looking for initially, you're looking for a good opportunity for growing your practice and having a group that has a, like other people said, an invested need for men's health, if that's what you want to do, and they have to see the value that you're adding and want to support that. You'll find some groups that are just looking for a urologist and may not necessarily be a men's health urologist, and getting a good understanding of what they truly want, so that way you can get an idea of what your practice is actually gonna look like. The only other thing that I know I wanted to add, just like Dr. Bierle mentioned, was when you're coming out of practice, we're all looking for a job, and you think, oh, am I going to find a job? But oftentimes right now is some of your strongest position to negotiate, because once you are moved in and you are there and you have a family and you have roots, they're not going to be offering you the latest equipment, just because you're interested. And knowing what you want and what you want to negotiate, now is a good opportunity.
Absolutely. That's really important. So that transparency early on, and knowing what you're going to be doing. I remember you, I know you're andrology trained. I remember you being an excellent robotic surgeon as well. Is that something that you happen to specify in any of your contracts, just knowing that that was a part of general urology that you still want to practice?
What I would tell people, because the next best thing to a penile prosthesis is probably a robot prostate. is, was that I would see and do as much robotics I would see and do as much men's health as was available. And if that meant 100% of my time, great. But if not, these are the things I want to be filling my time with.
That's great. That's a great way to look at that, building that practice up from the beginning. Absolutely. So one question I particularly wanted to ask you, related to the ways in which this generation is different from those prior, I think mentorship, as well as, leadership opportunities, involvement in the practice, tend to be particularly important to this generation. And you have the distinct pleasure of now working at the same institution where you completed residency and then fellowship training. Can you speak about how the potential for mentorship and collaboration with senior partners in an institution that you knew really well shaped your decision to take this job?
Yeah, I think wherever you go, you want to have a Rolodex of people you can call. And like where I practice is one of the regional health sites. So I'm not at the main campus, but everyone's a phone call or a text message away, or even a FaceTime away. Mm-hmm. Where you run into an issue, you have a complicated case. Sometimes it's an intra-op consult. Something weird has happened, and you're just curious how other people would handle it. And at least so far in my experience, it's more I just want someone to tell me, yes, you're doing the right thing. But having that from your senior partners wherever you go. So if you're not staying at your own institution, joining a group that has that interest in supporting you. So they support their junior partners. They're not just trying to use them for financial gain and things like that.
Absolutely. And I think that goes back to what was mentioned before. I think Dr. Gross, you were talking about culture and being a good fit at the institution. And I think it's really important for people to feel that support from everyone around them as well. It's a much better and happier place to work. And I think a happier place for patients to come to when they need care. So that was excellent. Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives from the physician side. I want to now share the other side of the equation, the institutional perspective. Michelle Seifert and Michael Palchik are from the Office of Physician Recruitment at the Cleveland Clinic, and they've spent years recruiting physicians across different generations. Today, they'll share with you some insights about the changes that they're seeing in this new workforce, some of the differences in outlooks and priorities that we've discussed today, and how their Office of Recruitment has adapted to better perhaps reflect these changes.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Wohl. Well, first, thank you all for inviting Michael and I to participate this evening. Our topic is strategies to attract and recruit the best physicians. In our experience, what we've seen at the Cleveland Clinic. The job market for doctors right now is booming and competition is very fierce. I was looking at some numbers from the UAU. Right now, there's about almost 14,000 practicing urologists. This is a huge growing medical field with a projected 72,500 job openings that are going to be needed through 2029. So basically, you are all in really good positions. You're in the driver's seat. And what the Cleveland Clinic, we have a really, really strong and competitive benefit package. The Cleveland Clinic is always continually to survey not only just our staff, but our entire caregiver population. And we just did this recently, and they've actually added benefits even during COVID when some places were taking away benefits. The Cleveland Clinic added paternity leave, and we offered that to our residents and fellows as well. So some of the things that I've noticed, I've been at the clinic for a little over 20 years. So I've recruited doctors from the different generations. I think work-life balance is huge with this generation. Compensation has always been important, but I think 92% of the younger generation wants that work-life balance. Money is important, but it's not the entire thing that they're looking for. Also, all of the panelists touched on it, investment in technology, and also adequately staffed support positions. So, so addressing physician burnout and things like that. But before I go into some of the investments that the Cleveland Clinic has done for our staff, we're fortunate enough to have several departments within the Cleveland Clinic professional staff department to support our doctors. So we have an Office of Professional Staff Affairs, and this gives us an extra layer of support for our physicians in addition to their own department support. We have OPSA ambassadors. I know we just talked about coaching and mentoring. We have formal programs for our physicians within coaching and mentoring. We also have a practice of innovations and professional fulfillment office. We were just talking about culture. So really all the panelists touched on some things that the clinic currently offers to our staff. So this office is responsible for a number of programs and initiatives that positively impact the Cleveland Clinic culture, and they support the group practice environment. And that kind of is what makes the Cleveland Clinic unique. We also have a comp department for our staff. This department is continually analyzing physician compensation, using several benchmarks and surveys to make sure that our comp is competitive. We are an academic practice, but we're kind of a hybrid. We have a regional practice too. We're very similar to Dr. Yang, where we have a Mayo Clinic. We also have an Office of Diversity and Inclusion. This is huge. Our office, diversity recruitment is something that we're in full support of. They have events, groups, communications, toolkits. It's very important. And we try our best to communicate and be transparent with all of that. We have a separate onboarding. I think somebody talked about onboarding and filling out a lot of paperwork.
We did.
I'm not sure if we got that all completely computerized or automated, but we have several hospitals, and I'm not sure if all the hospitals still require paper information or if they've gotten that all centralized. But we do have a formal onboarding program. We do have a credentialing department. The recruiters also help our recent recruits with licensure and things like that. One other thing I do want to point out too is we have several women on the call. We have a Women's Professional Staff Association. And when I'm talking to a lot of the doctors, especially the female staff, I just love promoting this. It's this group, we call it WPSA, represents the interests of the women serving on our professional staff here at the Cleveland Clinic, and it prepares them for advancement, establishing a meaningful network for support and for their development, and advocating the resources necessary to foster their engagement and happiness at work. So right now, the clinic has over 5,000 physicians on staff, and 40% are female. So it's a great group of women, and it's a huge, I think, benefit for our female staff as they're coming on board.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so I have Michael is on the call as well. He may want to talk about some of these benefits that the clinic has invested in, and some of them have been here for a long time, and some are new based on the generational changes.
Yes, hi, thank you. My name is Michael Palanchek. I've been with Office of Physician Recruitment for 12 years, and Michelle is actually my direct report. So I've learned most of my physician recruitment from her. So she does a good job covering all these topics. I would just say I notice I work with urology here at Cleveland Clinic and some other specialty areas. And, one of the things I think that helps us out for recruitment is one thing I've noticed here at the Cleveland Clinic is when we are hiring a new physician and I'm trying to get docs and working with the coordinators to, be available to interview these physicians that are coming in, these candidates. It's really impressive when you see a department and a group like all get behind it, make themselves available for dinners. Everybody likes a free dinner once in a while, but I can tell when we're doing a lot of recruiting, people are still coming in on Sunday evenings and they're all bought in and they're like, yeah, I can do it at 8 o'clock. I can meet it. And what that tells me is like, this is a group that seems to really buy in, and they're actually collectively recruiting this physician. and you're not really having to like keep bothering or, hey, are you available? Are you available, to get them to do that? So I think that the departments that I work that have been very successful have a team approach. And I think that also helps out when the physicians come in, because they are understanding now that they belong to a group and that there's group goals and things that people want to accomplish that are bigger than themselves. And that's kind of one of the things, like here at Cleveland Clinic, it's like there's a mission here that people buy into. And sometimes, like some people were saying, you could think, well, you know, I could probably go get paid maybe higher somewhere else, or maybe a little bit higher at least. But then you kind of go back to it. It's like, you know what, I really kind of believe in the mission here. I like what being a part of this organization, and you start kind of second guessing that. And so I think that's one good thing. As far as compensation is concerned, you know, we, as Michelle was saying, we have our compensation department. We want to make sure our offers are competitive. And I think it's, you know, when you get down to that offer, I think it should be an open back and forth win-win. I think that our teams want to say yes to the position and do as much as that we can until we can't. And then it's like, this is it. We can't go any further. You know, we have internal equity. We would be paying you higher than people that might have been here already for 2-3 years. Like, so we try to respect that as well. And I think that's a good thing about sometimes bigger organizations is they, you know, you want to be recognized. Hey, I've been working here for 3-4 years. I don't want maybe a new fellow coming in making more than me. That wouldn't feel right on the flip end. So I think we have a pretty fair program here, but you know, from the recruitment standpoint, we use companies from a company called Seekly right here in Cleveland, and they pick up the physicians and take them on 2-3 hour tours of the city. And they do that a lot of times on their first interviews. So before you're talking even realtors, I want to see houses or condos, it's really cool to use outside resources if you can get them even in your own communities, to show them, you know, the community landmarks. And I think that's really appreciated because we make that a 2 or 3 hour part of their visit. So that's been very helpful in recruiting the physicians as well. But I think, like I said, the dinners, the recruitment from the resources of the city and the collective buy-in, those have been big winning chips for us to secure physicians. And the compensation has to be analyzed. You know, if you have 3-4 physicians and they all turn positions down, something's wrong here. And sometimes I hear that, hey, we got to be more competitive. And it's like, yeah, because it's a lot of work. And then the other thing we talked about is retention. You know, I was reading something that 70% of physicians may leave their jobs in their first 3 years. And I thought, wow, that's shocking, you know, first off, because, you know, on our end, it could take 6 to 9 months to find a urologist. And if somebody left in every 24 months, it would, you know, by the time you kind of get used to the place, it would be very interesting to keep hearing people leaving. So I think that really comes down to saying, hey, what is the goals of this physician? How do we get them to retain them? And are we checking back with them on, say, you know, every 6 to 12 months and saying, hey, where are we at? How are you doing? What do you want to accomplish? Are there promotion opportunities here? You know, if you have a superstar and they can't get ahead with a position, or maybe they can't become a section head or a chair or a vice chair, or a medical director, they're probably leaving at some point. And so hospitals have to recognize that talent is, you know, not just going to stay forever. So I think we put ourselves in a good position to make sure that there's promotions going on as well. And also your annual compensation, what is that going to look like in 3 years and 5 years? When you start, is it a tier level approach? What will I be earning here in 3 years? Or is it just an annual increase? Do they have annual increases? Or, you know, does that happen regularly? How does that going to look in a few years? So I think in the beginning, you know, sometimes I can say, hey, okay, this is where I'm starting at, but if I'm successful, where would I be at? Where are the physicians at 3 and 5 years here at this organization? What can they advance to? And how are, you know, obviously I'm going to pay my dues, but how are promotions handed out here? So those are some of the things that you can ask about in the beginning too.
I want to add to a lot of the panelists are dual physician couples. So we're very strategic with recruitment of husband-wife teams or dual physician teams. So sometimes, say we're recruiting a urologist and the spouse is maybe radiology or respiratory institute. We are very cognizant of that, and we try to, you know, the spouse is engaged whether they're a doctor or not throughout the whole recruitment process. But we are, dual physician couples do get a little bit of special attention, especially if one physician is available and maybe there isn't a position for another person. So the chairs do work in that regard. Here in Cleveland, we have a huge healthcare community. The Cleveland Clinic is quite large. We also have university hospitals right down the street from us. And then we have, the third largest VA in the area, as well as Metro Health, which is our county hospital. So we have a lot of healthcare here too. So Michael and I are networked with all of those locations too, even though we're kind of competing. But when we do have dual spouse recruitment, we become friends with everybody and see if there's something that'll work. So the family can find gainful employment for both physicians. Also, I wanted to talk about one of the physicians, I think Dr. Adrino was talking about vacation time that was important to him here at the Cleveland Clinic. And this is a good question. You do want to talk when you're interviewing, when do the benefits kick in? Do they kick in right away from your start date, or do you have to wait 90 days before your benefits kick in? And that could put you in a COBRA situation. So again, here at the clinic, our benefits kick in right away. And I always point that out when I'm talking to somebody and highlighting that. But vacation time here, where the doctors are able to bank time, which is kind of nice. So they get vacation time, but they're not forced to take it. So that's a great question to ask if you're going through the interview process. How does the vacation time, holiday time work? We also give CME time. It's not all grouped together. So we have separate time for vacation, holiday. We have a quite large CME allowance, which is up to 26 days for most docs, and there's CME allowance as well. So that's important. And I think it's important for the doctors to have that work-life balance too. We also have wellness days. So we give those to our physicians as well. And again, I think it just goes to that whole family support and quality of life that the doctors now are looking for. Years ago, I guess, when we're recruiting, it was Cleveland Clinic. A lot of people just said, okay, I'll work for the Cleveland Clinic. We had a great brand, but again, that's not the case anymore. We've really upped the benefit packet to reflect this new generation of physician.
Thank you so much for those details. I think it really reflects how, at this institution, you've been able to listen to some of the things that this new emerging workforce has been asking for and reflect a lot of those things in the benefits that you offer and some very sort of unique things as well. So thank you so much for sharing that. Next, I was hoping to go through just a few cases with the time that we have left to demonstrate some of the concepts that we discussed today and just generate a discussion about some of these concepts. So this is case one for everyone. Dr. Irrigation. He's a busy andrology specialist who's looking forward to starting a family with his partner. But while he loves his job, he's worried about his ability to care for his young family going forward. Both he and his partner currently work long weekday hours and some weekends. Surgical days are especially unpredictable depending on OR availability, block time. And in addition to this, the couple has just been told that they will need to do IVF. Gets a call about a job opportunity in another city with the following: generous paid leave for both new parents, coverage for IVF under the hospital health plan. They have a hospital daycare for sick children and a childcare stipend to subsidize the cost of a babysitter or a nanny. And in addition, his new schedule would offer him some more flexibility in his hours, such as the ability to start his clinics early and end early on certain days. Can any of you sort of mention, maybe echo some of these that I just mentioned or other things, some of the important ways that employers, perhaps at your current job or other jobs that you've heard about, have shown their ability to tackle some of these concerns that families have in the current workforce?
Really briefly, just thinking about the IVF benefits, that's a really hot topic nowadays. Our company has recently started offering some fertility benefits, and it was something that we really had to advocate for. Now, this situation, this job doesn't sound like the job for this person, right? They're suffering from their quality of life. It didn't seem right for that person, but what are the negative things with the other job? But if you're in a job you like and fertility benefits are a big thing, it never hurts to ask. So
that's a great point. So if you love your job, but there's a benefit isn't currently offered, see if you can talk to your employer about it. Anyone else have any thoughts about family planning benefits, childcare benefits, anything creative that you've seen employers offer or do? Perhaps telehealth clinics, I think Dr. Andino mentioned.
Yes, so Mayo has some of these benefits, like there is fertility benefits, but you also have to look into the fine print about what it truly covers and doesn't cover, and then have a real understanding of what IVF costs, which you would think as andrologists we all know, but I know a lot about the men's side of things, but then since my wife is a physician, we did fertility preservation when we were younger, and trying to go through and truly figure out how much all of this costs. I mean, there's it's not cheap, but it's not crazy expensive for a physician. And so, you've put in 3 years of sweat equity in your job. It sounds pretty terrible based off of the hours and the weekends and this clinic. The benefits in and of itself doesn't necessarily say anything about the job itself.
Interesting. Great points. So see if you love your job, see if you can work with your employer on some of these benefits. Great. All right, I'm going to move to the second case now. If no one has any more thoughts about this one. This is Dr. Reversal, an andrology fellow looking for jobs. She's 2 excellent job offers in her desired geographic area with competitive salaries. Notably, she's always wanted to be involved in hospital leadership. One job is a standard 5 clinical days per week without any specific additional responsibilities, though she could get involved in practice management later on if she was interested. The other job has a dedicated track for early career development, involvement in hospital administration committees, and a faculty mentorship program for early career physicians. There's no initial dedicated time for administrative responsibilities, but this actually could be negotiated later on based on her interest. Has anyone heard of dedicated tracks for early administrative responsibilities is something that's desired by this generation of either sexual medicine specialists or urologists, and how common or uncommon is it for any job to offer this? Anyone at all? And Dr. Andino, I know you have an MBA.
Yeah. I was going to say, I haven't heard about it specifically. I'm sure it exists. Each department, particularly in academic centers, will have different metrics that will kind of dictate the different promotion tracks that folks can go down. Obviously, research is the obvious one, and publications and grants is the easy thing to think of. But more and more places seem to be getting a little bit more creative and kind of building in highlighting other areas like administrative time, leadership roles, involvement in DEI committees. So other things that clearly departments find valuable, and saying, well, if we think that these things are valuable, we should recognize that they're valuable and help take that into account into promotion tracks. This case is like a perfect example of kind of like understanding what makes sense for an individual applicant, because job A and job B may be perfect for 2 completely different people. I think we all know our colleagues who are like, I did my 5 or 6 years of residency, I did my 1 or 2 years of fellowship. Now I just want to operate and see patients, and that's all I want to do. They see admin or leadership things as politics, and they have no interest in that. And then there's folks, myself included, who would find job B amazing, and the importance of early career development and mentorship, and realizing that there's ways to impact care at a broader level than just the individual clinic or the individual OR. It's just going to click for one person more than another.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that's worth mentioning, that we probably do want to facilitate, physician leadership in hospital systems, and we want to improve the pipeline of sexual medicine specialists in leadership roles, and that there could be some creative ways of making that happen and helping people pursue those interests if they happen to have them. So, things like mentorship programs, support to pursue a business management degree or time to attend practice management courses. Those are offered, through the AUA and sometimes otherwise through other groups. Support to attend regional or national society meetings, whether that means, CME money or even just time to go do that doesn't get counted in your vacation time necessarily. Anyone else have any thoughts on this?
I mean, between job A and job B, for me, job B is more of an academic job. When I was at Emory and also at Mayo, we had some dedicated admin time. And as you talked about before, we all have a ton of paperwork and things like that to work on. Mm-hmm. Whereas, job A could be academic, but, certainly you're going to see that a lot more in private practice. To truly understand, you have CME days and you can use your CME days, but what does that mean in terms of how much RVUs are you generating? How does that affect, potential bonuses and compensation packages? There's a lot of things that when I was initially looking at contracts that you think are important, which are usually like the big ticket items like your salary. But it's the little things that you actually find out to be the important things that either make your job annoying or great.
That's a great point. All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip through case 3 and get right to our takeaways from this excellent session we've had today. So fundamentally, the physician workforce is dynamic. It's diverse. The new generation has a strong sense of purpose in their work and a desire to really belong within their practice, but they also desire some balance in their work and life in order to maintain a long and healthy career. And I think that that's what we all want. Employers, on the other hand, also want to ensure that they attract talented surgeons and retain them long term. It's good for patients and organizations both when physicians get involved in leadership. And as generations age, the better we train our new generations, the more seamless our eventual transitions will be. We discussed a lot of solutions today to meet some of these goals and had a very insightful and I think spirited discussion today. Not sure that we have too much time for questions tonight. I think we're a little bit over the hour. So I'd just like to thank Vanita Augustine and Chris Perko of CCF Benefits and HR for their help with some of this material that I shared in the introduction tonight. Thank you so much to our wonderful panel for sharing their time and expertise tonight. And thank you all for attending this SMSNA webinar. Have a wonderful night, everyone. We'll see you next time.